All right, folks, this is the second half of our twofer in terms of episode series. This is the best players in fantasy basketball, and this is your Roto draft order for the top 12. This is Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm your host, Dan Vespers. Thanks, as always, for tuning in, everybody. Like, rate, subscribe before you do anything else on any show. Do those things. Also, feel free to comment. I've been saying that towards the end of the program, but I'm going to try to do a better job of remembering to say it at the beginning. Earlier today, we did a show with my top 12 on head-to-head. This is my top 12 in Roto, and there's obviously going to be a lot of overlap because the first few players are just incredibly good fantasy basketball players, and so you're going to see them come a couple of times. But after that, you'll see a little bit of an adjustment in the order, and I will obviously explain my reasoning as we work our way through. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on the BetOnline $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200K. And then, when the game's over, head on over to the online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. That is BetOnline. The game starts here. This is my top 12 in Roto. Again, this is not a final rank board, although for Roto, it's going to be a little bit closer to that than it was on the head-to-head side. The big difference, of course, again, being that rank board is going to have some guys that perhaps have some injury issues in slightly different places than where they are on this list. And then there are some guys, the example I used on the other one was like a Kawhi Leonard, who's not going to be on this draft board, even though he's likely a top 5 per game guy. Let's get right into it. Again, a reminder, this is the order that I would draft these players in Roto, not their final rank. Number 1, Nikola Jokic. You guys know this about me by now, but we'll do a very quick recap on the reasoning on this one. For head-to-head, I think there's a better argument to go Wemby at 1, although I still prefer Jokic in this particular battle. On the Roto side, the big gap here is the fact that Jokic just really doesn't hurt you almost anywhere. He's a very small negative in three-pointers, but again, from a center, it's not that big an issue. I know Embiid hits more, and Wemby's going to hit more, and these guys are also centers. But like Anthony Davis is another early round center that doesn't hit the 3-ball. You can very much come back from that if you so choose. I would argue that Jokic, the bigger issue for Nikola is actually in blocks, which again, we can address that. And the beauty of Jokic, if I've said it one time, I've said it 1,000. If I've said it 1,000, I'll say it once, is that you can do anything you want. Typically, the players going near pick 24 on the way back around, when you loop back to your next pick, are guys like Jalen Brunson, Damian Lillard, Paul George, De'Aaron Fox, LeBron, Lauri Markkanen, Tyrese Maxey, Kawhi Leonard. In Roto, that's a spot to go Kawhi, because Jokic is incredibly durable, and I know that sort of, everybody is until they're not, but it does help that he doesn't really get off the ground very much, so you avoid the landing awkwardly kind of injuries for him. He's been perennially an 85% or more games played dude, so sure, why the hell not? I mean, Kawhi was number 6 per game last year. He's probably going to be better than that this season, and this way you don't even really care. But look, I'm not here to tell you who to take in the second and third round with Jokic. I'm just saying you can literally do anything. You don't need to play it safe. You can take risks because he's durable and he's good. You could lean into strengths. You could try to cover up any weaknesses. You could blindfold yourself and auto-draft your second and third round picks, and you'd still be fine. You may end up with Dame and Paul George there, and you know what? Your team would be totally okay, because you'd have okay scoring, and you'd have good steals, and you'd have good assists. Your rebounds would be fine. Your threes would get covered up. Field goal percent would be back down around league average. Free throws would be good. You can literally do anything you want, and you pretty much can't screw up a Nikola Jokic build, at least not early on. If you make enough mistakes, you can mess up any build. But like the guys that are on the board, just any one of them, you'll be fine. Whereas for Wemby, who's my number 2 pick here in Roto, same deal as on the head-to-head side. But again, I think the gap is bigger in this one because there are kind of ways to screw up the Wemby build. Again, because it's Roto, you can always go per game upside hunting. But you have a few more holes to cover up. Just then thinking about, like, what is that? A Day in the Life, the Beatles song. How many holes? What was it, in Blackbird, Lancashire? I don't remember the exact lyrics there. Well, how many is it going to take to cover up the holes in Victor Wembanyama's famous fantasy game? It's a little bit more effort. That's it. Like, you're going to have to cover up both percentages, most likely. You're probably going to have to deal with the turnovers thing. The assists are going to be fine. You don't have to cover those up, but you're going to definitely need to supplement it more than on Jokic. Steals and blocks are in good shape. So, again, you don't have to deal with that. I just, in my eyes, there's just a little bit more work to do. And so if you take kind of the wrong pair, like if you blindfold yourself and you end up with Dame and Paul George, your team is going to be fine. But on the Jokic team, we basically just illustrated a club that's now pretty good at like all nine fantasy categories. That same blindfolded auto pick team with Victor Wembanyama is going to be very good in threes and fine in rebounds, but not particularly great in assists. And steals are pretty good, and blocks are still very good, but percentages, field goal percent is bad. Free throw will be fine, but unspectacular. Turnovers are going to be kind of meh. Like, again, we're talking about someone who's likely to be the number 1 player in fantasy for many years running, possibly as soon as this season. But just the way that their games are constructed for fantasy purposes, Jokic is just the easy button. Third pick is Luka Doncic. I still don't think that even in Roto, Shai has done enough to jump him here. And I know Shai did more than Luka last season, but if you look at the last 2 months, that was actually kind of flip-flopped. Luka was number 4. Shai was number 7 over that stretch, and an injured Kristaps Porzingis and Joel Embiid were actually the guys in between them. But there was a pretty good gap in terms of overall value. Luka had just passed him at the midway point. Shai's steals were not as large. His scoring was not as large. His field goal percent came down a little bit. I just think, again, like team building standpoint, with Luka, you have less to worry about. Roto or head-to-head right now. But it's close. It's close. And so Shai is number 4 here. Even if there's maybe one guy out there that still has, maybe 2, a little bit more per game upside, you got to go, I think, with the young dude. And that's Shai. He's younger. He's a better bet to make it through the season in one piece. And maybe the steals do come back a little bit. But I do think there is probably a slight downward trajectory to what Shai is expected to do this year. That's going to be a better team if he doesn't quite have to do as much single-handed heavy lifting on a night-to-night basis. And for Roto, the fact that he's not great at boards or assists doesn't break you the same way as on head-to-head. Because head-to-head, being good at a bunch of stuff is actually kind of a negative. It's weird, but it's the truth, because competitive leagues, you got to be great at a bunch of stuff and then like terrible at 1 or 2 things. And Shai is not that. He was damn close to a 9-category all-star last year. He was a little bit sub-average in 3-pointers. That's really like the big one for him. And you can cover that up. It's pretty easy to fix that on the Roto side. Head-to-head, you just lean into being bad at it. But again, like the lack of really bad category for Shai means you could just sort of roll along with a bunch of good rebounders and passers, someone who hits some threes, and you're fine, basically. It's a pretty easy player to build on also in kind of a different way. Let's take a very quick break and slip in a commercial to, buy me a soda. Next on the list is the same. Again, this parallels the head-to-head side, is Anthony Davis at 5. I think this is an easier argument to make, actually, on the Roto side, because the games played situation is less of a concern. It's still a concern, especially for a first rounder. You don't want them missing 25, 30 games. But if we assume Anthony Davis can mostly make it through the season, he gives you a really strong start in a number of categories that are kind of hard to get all together at a later juncture in the draft. You're going to have to fix the three-pointers issue. You're going to have to get a guard, probably in the second round if you can, which, again, easier said than done. You got to shore up those assists a little bit. And that is part of what makes an Anthony Davis build a little bit more complicated. But getting that big start in both percentages with the steals and blocks is a really nice starting point. And you're also going to be pretty darn competitive in turnovers because you've taken arguably the lowest turnover guy in this mix, one of two, I guess. So you set yourselves up to not get creamed in that one. And this is where the paths diverge, the head-to-head and Roto paths. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood. What's that one? Is that Robert Frost? I forget. Some high school class is kicking around in my brain. Joel Embiid is my number 6 on the Roto side. Joel Embiid. This is a terrifying pick. I realize that. But his individual ability to just dominate fantasy is so much more powerful than anybody else that's going after pick 5. There's this big drop-off. And if you're just looking at like player value from last year, Joel Embiid was effectively worth like 2 of the guys that we're now debating against him. Haliburton, Tatum, guys at Durant, guys in that ilk. Embiid was worth 2 of those guys. Because to get what you get out of him in one roster slot with the massive, massive efficiency positive, in addition to the scoring, the rebounding, the assists, the steals, the blocks, like just pairing him up with some crap dink league average type of guy is as good as Kevin Durant and Tyrese Haliburton together. I'm not saying the stats are going to match up perfectly, but like Embiid plus the like 90th ranked guy is basically the same in overall team value. That's how powerful he is. And on the Roto side, you take the risk. Your team can survive it if he misses 20 games. Your teams can probably survive it if he misses 25. Anything over that, and you're kind of in trouble. But if he gets anywhere near those games played numbers, like if he gets into the 60s, the teams that are drafting these other guys that just simply aren't as good, they have a very, very tall order to catch up with you, provided, again, you don't completely biff the rest of your draft. But if you just lean into the per-game upside part of this thing, and Embiid gives you 60 games, outstanding. I don't care if he's going to do a little bit less. This is the time to take the risk in a Roto Games Cap format, I believe, pretty strongly. Tyrese Haliburton remains my number 7 player. You might remember on the head-to-head board, that was actually Giannis in the 6 hole with a punt free throw build. Giannis at 7 is fine. He's probably going to finish around 11, 12, somewhere in that neck of the woods, so not too much of a drop-off, but I expect his health to be a little better this season. You get that nice assists start on good percentages, which is a hard combination to find outside of basically Nikola Jokic and Tyrese Haliburton. The other big assist guys, Trae Young's a bad field goal dude. Luka has a free throw issue. James Harden, field goal issue. LeBron, free throw issue. Sabonis, free throw issue. John Morant, possibly both. Freddie VanVleet, field goal. Anyway, you guys get the idea. Tyrese Haliburton, Nikola Jokic are the 2 least impactful, negatively at least. And with Jokic, he's a big positive in both of them. Haliburton is basically a net neutral in one and a positive in the other. Whereas you got all these other guys, negative, 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 double negative for some. Harden is probably your 3rd best choice in this group for whatever reason. Unless you think LeBron can keep up that crazy 54% shooting clip. I'm not sure that I do. But that's why Haliburton is so useful here, is that he does not ruin your percentages, specifically from a guard, to be that good at field goal percent, because you know the big man's going to sort of paper it over. He doesn't score much. That's the issue with Haliburton. I don't mind. My Roto teams end up being kind of low scoring on the whole anyway, because I'm hunting efficiency. I'm hunting defensive stats, things that I think are easier to win. I like the high assist to turnover ratio for Haliburton so that I can remain very competitive in turnovers despite being a good assist team. And so now my job the rest of the way is just not to ruin that part of my team build and maybe get to like mid-pack in points as opposed to the bottom. But I think Haliburton's a pretty good fit here. He's an easy guy to build on in Roto, and that's why I like him at 7, ahead of Jayson Tatum, who, again, I think these guys probably finish pretty close to one another this year. Tatum will move up a tiny bit in per game with no Porzingis. He's going to beat Haliburton in points and rebounds. They'll be close in three-pointers, I reckon. Haliburton's obviously going to boat race Jayson in assists. Steals will be pretty close. Haliburton won that one last time. Haliburton, they were pretty much tied in both percentages and blocks this last year. I think Haliburton better free throw percent, but fewer of them. So, impact, it was about the same. So the difference really is, do you want to get the tougher stat to find assists early, or do you want to get the tougher stat to find rebounds early? And that's why I prefer Haliburton. But either way, you get a nice, young, probably healthy player coming into this season. For Tatum, he's coming off the finals run and the Olympics, so there's a little bit of hesitation there. But he is a very safe play. The problem, of course, is that to catch the guys at the top of the board, you're really going to have to nail your second, third, fourth, fifth round picks. And I suppose that's the case for most of these guys. And it's why number 9 is Kevin Durant, who's in a similar boat to these other dudes. KD, I know, struggled a bit down the stretch last year. I don't think that's a thing that's going to keep up super long term, because what I liked about Kevin Durant down the stretch is that he finally got that free throw percent up. Last month of the season, he shot 88% at the foul line, 23 points, 6 boards, 4 assists, a little over a steal, a little over a block. 51-88 were the splits for KD there. That free throw back up around 88, 90 instead of 85 or 86. That actually changes his value quite a bit. I'd like to see the rebounds get into the mid-6s. I'd like to see the assists a little bit higher, although with Tyus Jones around and a healthy Bradley Beal to start the year, that might be a number that tapers off a little bit. But honestly, now you could make the same argument as Jayson Tatum. He's going to be a decent scorer, okay rebounds, Tatum a little better. They'll probably have very close assists to one another. KD is a better shot blocker than either of the two guys we just talked about, but he's another positive percentages dude, which for me, a guy who sometimes ends up punting points, you got to make sure your volume guys acquired early in a draft are good at both percentages. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So KD, nice and well-rounded, very comfortable with him in this range. Again, I don't think he's a guy that's going to blow up your team, and that's kind of what you're trying to do at this point. Because if you don't have a guy like Embiid on the board, who might be the number 1 player, there's just no reason to take a huge swing. Steph Curry is my number 10. This one was a tough one for me, because even if Steph bounces back a bit, even if the steals get up to 0.9 and the field goal percent goes back up to like 47, there's still some issues to address, namely defense. But again, like the other options you're looking at here, I don't think have the same foundational element. And then, a few of the guys in this range last year, Paul George went to a situation where he's not going to do as much. Donovan Mitchell hasn't played 80% of his team's games in a while, a couple of seasons. Larry Markkinen is probably going to sit down the stretch this year, leaving you basically like 2 to 3 viable options in this range, and Steph is probably the safest of them, and that's kind of why he ended up here for me at 10 as kind of a by default sort of choice, because the next name on the list is James Harden, who, by the way, I like James Harden a lot, but okay. I mean, you could flip-flop the two if you really wanted to, I guess. What I've been talking about on the pod, and I'll do it again on this one, is you look at Harden from his last year in Philly when he played 58 ball games. Not great. Hopefully that number would be higher. But he was at 21 points and 11 assists. And that was with Embiid ahead of him and an up-and-coming Tyrese Maxey. Now it's really just Kawhi ahead. So I honestly think you might get more shooting out of James. So maybe Harden's the choice at 10 over Steph. You'll get a big assist bump. The defensive stats will be better. The field goal percent will likely be worse. And frankly, the scoring might be worse. But I think you can make a pretty good argument for either Steph or Harden at 10. And even frankly, as I'm talking about it right now, I might lean Harden. Hell, I might lean Harden even on the head-to-head side over these dudes. So I got to go back and redo the end of that video. And then number 12 is Donovan Mitchell, who is, again, an upside play. He was number 15, not this past year, but the year before this. He was number 8 this last season. And he is like the spitting image of some of those other dudes. How do you choose between Donovan Mitchell, Jayson Tatum, Tyrese Haliburton, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, James Harden? Everybody's got some kind of problem. For Donovan Mitchell, it's mostly durability, a little bit of field goal percent problem, but his stat set is really similar to Jayson Tatum. It's very similar to Kevin Durant. They were separated by half a point. Donovan hit 1 more three-pointer than KD. KD had 1.5 more rebounds. Mitchell 1 assist. The big gap between the two was that Donovan Mitchell was at 1.8 steals. KD was at 0.9. KD was at 1.2 blocks. Donovan Mitchell was 0.5. But like a lot of the counting stuff matched up pretty tight. Actually looks an awful lot like Kawhi Leonard's line as well. Which throws into focus like how wild it is that Kawhi Leonard, and even in Roto leagues, is going so much later than these guys, because his durability stuff isn't much worse. Like right in this moment, he sat out the Olympics, so that's problematic, and he finished up this last year hurt, so that's also trouble. But like his stat line looks an awful lot like KD's. One of these guys is going a round and a half ahead of the other one. In any event, that's not the point of all of this. You're not drafting Kawhi Leonard in the top 12. Just making an argument for why he could potentially go sooner than many. It's actually a great reason to want to pick in the top 2 or 3 also. You can get Kawhi at the end of the second round or beginning of the third in Roto, and that's a big advantage to have to pile up those guys. Now, again, not trying to minimize the injury impact, but goodness gracious. So Donovan Mitchell, he was at 26.5 points this last year, 5 boards, 6 assists, good steals, good free throw, great threes. There's a lot to like about him. You just kind of hope that he gets to 64 games played. Will he? I don't know. But again, there's a big drop-off in per-game production after these guys, and that's the reason that I like the combination I do. You will also notice that there's no Giannis and no Trae Young on this board, and you will also likely yell at me about it. I'm half expecting, maybe 2/3 expecting the comment section to be just lit up with where the hell is Giannis and where the hell is Trae Young. They would probably be among the next players I'd take. The problem is, in Roto, I am not inclined to punt on draft night. Sometimes I'll get to the end of a draft, or I'll get to, frankly, December 1st, and I'm like, well, my team is 3rd from the bottom in points. That's happened to me more times than I can count, because I like efficiency and I like defensive stats, and those guys are often not the big-time scorers. I get to December 1st, and I realize, well, I've got, name your dude. I got Michael Porter Jr. on my team, who, one of his biggest attributes was just the ability to put the ball in the bucket. Maybe that's not even the best option. I've got Tyler Hero on my team. And with the build that I had in this particular league, I didn't have Tyler Hero, but he's an example of someone that would fit this mold. I had no use for him. His big gainers were points and threes. Assuming I had plenty of three-pointers on whatever team that was we're talking about, I would be much better served to move a Tyler Hero who scores a bunch for somebody who scores 11 points a game, but rebounds and passes and gets defensive stats. That's the mid-season pivot, but it's not a punt on opening night. You're still taking value guys. You're still taking dudes that you think have a nice chance to outperform where they're getting drafted. The value plays add up. And I got lost in a tangential thought here, but it's kind of this whole like Giannis in strict 9-cat ratings is number 34. I mean, we obviously know he's not the 34th best player in the NBA, and he's not the 34th best player in fantasy. But if you're taking Giannis, the damage he does in one category, free throws, basically outweighs the good in a bunch of other ones. And on head-to-head, it doesn't matter. You can just pretend that category doesn't exist. But in Roto, if you're not attempting to punt that on draft night, you can't pretend it doesn't exist. If you want to not be at the very bottom of that pack, you need to laser in if you took Giannis in the first round, which you'd have to do because he's going to go in the first round, you'd have to laser in the second, third rounds, typically on guys that are big positive impact foul shooters. You'd need a Damian Lillard in the second round. You need to pair him up with a Devin Booker if you can get him, or a Steph Curry if you can get him, and you probably can't. With if you go deeper, you can try to get a DeMar DeRozan and a Jimmy Butler together, and DeMar, Jimmy Butler, and Damian Lillard all together basically take care of the damage that Giannis is doing. But now you've left yourself open to other mistakes. And I have the same general feeling about Trae Young. This last year, Trae Young was number 36 in 9-cat because of turnovers, field goal percent, low blocks, low rebounds. But in head-to-head, who cares? Ignore the turnovers. Ignore the field goal percent. Ignore them all for all I care. But in Roto, you can't ignore them all. You might be able to get away with ignoring one. You can often punt a category in Roto and win that league. And in fact, it's not a horrible strategy if you can make sure that you're very, very good in the other 7 or 8 categories you're trying to hunt down. For you can't punt 2-3 things in a good Roto league and come away with a win. Not on draft night. And not without being like the ultimate in needle threading. And so Trae Young, even if we see a boost in his usage, which we probably will with DeJounte gone, what does that move him from in 9-cat? 36 to 20-something? I don't think he's shooting 46% from the field again anytime soon. That felt like just one very weird year because the rest of his career, he's been around where he was last year, 42, 43, 44 range. So let's assume Trae Young doesn't magically get better from the field again. A few more points, a couple more three-pointer chunks, quanta, some tenths. I don't know how much higher the assists could go. So let's assume those stay somewhat close to what they are. How does Trae Young justify in Roto a first-round pick? He just sort of doesn't. Would I mean, like if you had the 12th pick and you went Donovan Mitchell and Trae Young together, would I yell at you for doing Trae with one of them? I would not. I don't really like that pairing in Roto, but like there aren't many guys that can do what Trae does in those categories. And you do set yourself behind the 8 ball. And again, you're trying to sort of gain ground on the teams in front of you. But this is why I look at these other dudes first, because you don't have to ignore any of their categories to make them first rounders. They could all do it on their own. Steph probably has the hardest time of any of these guys because he has to sort of magically get younger again. But, I mean, the rest of these dudes, like, you don't have to eliminate a category to make them a first-round pick. And so that's why Giannis and Trae are not on this top 12. But they're on the head-to-head top 12. Bet your butt. Being great at some stuff and horrible at others is way more important in head-to-head than it is in Roto. In Roto, you don't want that. You don't want to have to cover up bad stuff. We're going to leave that board up on the screen for a few minutes after we finish up so folks can get a look at it. But again, a reminder, if you have any comments, feel free to drop them in there. I have no problem with answering those. Just, again, keep it respectful. Please follow on Twitter, @DanBesbris and @OldManSquad. And most importantly, subscribe. However you're taking in the content, that is the big one for us. We continue to grow here as the ramp up to the season is kicking into full swing. And very soon, we're going to do my world famous, I think I can say that. No, I can't say that. Sound like a real douchebag, Dan. My industry 9-cat Roto mock. That's coming up in the not too distant future. We'll get some of the best of the best of the best in there. And then we'll have them on the show to break their teams down. That'll be 12, 11, I guess, unless I just do one show on my own team. Probably won't. Really, really fun shows. This is how these other guys are going to build their well-rounded rosters. Meantime, we're also going to continue to do sort of doubling up on mock slots. We did 2 from the Wemby hole. I got to watch my language, man. Well, we'll do a few from each slot. We'll do some Jokic mocks, do some Luka mocks. Basically, you do one, you see little things that you can tweak. You try to make those adjustments on the fly, and we'll kind of perfect it in real time. You guys might as well see the process because it's a little different every year. And it'll be a little bit different the next time the Yahoo board shuffles. So we got a lot of work to do on that front. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Kept this one to a half an hour. A new record. I'm Dan Bespris. This is Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. And again, this was my Roto first 12 draft picks. Okay? Draft order top 12. Not the final rank top 12, because honestly, I don't think that's actually going to help you all that much, because that just tells you where I think guys might end up. It doesn't tell you the order you should draft them in, because it's all game theory, remember. How to get as many of the guys as you want each draft. And the order you take them does matter. See you guys tomorrow.